I was born in 1950, and I'm going to tell you what I remember about polio growing up. In the summer when it was hot, we were not allowed to go outside because they thought that if you got overheated, this would bring on polio because there were so many different versions of how you could get it. The first memory I really have of it is when I was about 8 years old and our whole family had to go to Boys Town, and they were giving us, we had to stand in a long line in the gymnasium, and they were giving us little cups of an oral polio vaccine, and all I remember is that it tasted really sweet. So my mother had a good friend. She graduated from high school, and the summer after high school she got polio, and she got it very bad, and she was in an iron lung. I can remember as a child, if we would go over to her house, she could be out of her iron lung for about 45 minutes at a time. My dad had a brother that contracted polio when he was very young. He was about 2 years old, and he could not walk. And so the family saved their money, bought him a tricycle, taped his feet to the pedals of the tricycle, and then the older kids took turns pushing him around the house, and eventually he did get back the strength in his legs, and he actually had a totally normal life. That is what I can remember from growing up. It was a terrible thing to have, so I'm glad we have the vaccination for it now.
I was in medical school at the time. In August, I was going down to St. Joe with the girl who was later to be my wife to meet my father and to get a ring made. And on the train from Omaha to St. Joe, I started to get a headache. And this continued on. They met us, and we went to their home and had dinner and sat around and visited. But the headache just kept getting worse and worse, and finally I said, I have to go to bed. So I went upstairs and slept fitfully, and got up the next morning still with a hell of a headache. So I thought, well, I'll get in a tub of hot water and that'll relax my muscles. And I found that when I was in the tub, I could not see my navel. I couldn't bend my neck. I was a medical student, senior at the time. I had an uncle, and I called him. He was a physician, and he met me, and they did a spinal, and there was a few white cells in it, and they said, well, you have polio. So they admitted me to the hospital there. Then the hospital suggested to my uncle that I be moved to an isolation hospital. It wasn't known whether this was person-to-person contagion or not. So I went out to an isolation hospital outside of town, and I was the only patient in it at the time. At that time, my medical friends in Omaha decided that I better come up there. So they called my uncle and said, did they mind if they came down with an ambulance and brought me up? They had emptied all of the pediatrics out of St. Joe's, sent them to other hospitals, and filled it all up, with 60 or 80 people with acute polio. And I was in St. Joe's 3 or 4 weeks or longer. But I got over the acute phase within a few days. My memory of it is it was pretty hot. There was no air conditioning, and it was August, and they were wrapping your arms and legs in hot steaming towels. And so I got so then that I could stand and move. I then went back to school, required usually somebody to walk with me, and within a period of several months I was back to almost normal. I graduated in December, interned in Kansas City, then came up here and was married. By that time, I was playing tennis, I could run, I could do anything. My wife and I had 6 boys and 3 girls. Then my wife died suddenly, and we were on a tour in Mexico. She had a cardiac arrest, and so I came back, took some time off, and eventually went back to work. After a couple of years went by, I began to date my present wife, who was widowed from her husband, my close friend, Bill Hudson. We married. Then after a few years, I retired. We went to Florida. I eventually bought a condo and would be there about half the year. But early in Florida time, once or twice I stepped off a curbing and fell. No reason, just the leg gave out. So that kind of gradually became more obvious. It was called post-polio syndrome. They don't really know what does it. But as you age and your occasional neuron starts to bow out, it takes a number of neurons to the extremity out, and you have symptoms, whereas normally you wouldn't. So at the present time now, I'm down to where I need either a chair or a walker to get around. I feel wonderful. I'm limited. Steps, I can't do any. I have to plan where I'm going. It doesn't require steps. What will be the end result of it is probably as bad as it'll get. Now, I've been really very fortunate because I escaped the acute polio with mild symptoms compared to being in an iron lung to breathe. And probably there were 10 or 15 iron lungs. These are a tank that the person is in. Their head is outside. The tank creates a vacuum causing the chest to expand and whatnot, so they breathe with it. That's the story of my polio. About the time our children were coming along, Jonas Salk perfected a vaccine that you could shoot one shot and give an immunity to polio.
I think one of the things that we forget sometimes in modern society is just exactly what a big benefit vaccination had on our quality of life and life expectancy. These were life-changing interventions we had. There were all of these diseases like measles and polio and pertussis that used to not only kill a lot of infants and children, but actually make people really sick. And now we're able to essentially eliminate so many of those, both worldwide and even in the United States, seriously decrease a lot of them. And so it's a hugely important public health intervention. I think one of the things that's a problem is that in the United States we've been so blessed by good health care that we forget what it's like to live without those and forget the fact that in other parts of the world there are people lining up and walking for days to get to the vaccination because they know it's such a life-changing measure. I don't know that there's been a single intervention in medicine that has had as big an impact, sustained impact, as vaccination. The biggest consequence is then you're placing your child at risk for disease. You're also placing the society at large at risk. There are a lot of children who can't get vaccinated for reasons like allergy or problems with their immune system, and they rely on the rest of us who can get vaccinated to keep these diseases out of circulation. So when we're not getting vaccinated, not only are you putting yourself at risk, but you're putting other children in your community at risk too. It's not a decision you're making just for your child. One of the things that is difficult is that there is so much information and bad information on the internet. And people tend to believe that anything on the internet, especially if it comes up on the first page of Google, must be true. And that's really not true. And so trying to reinforce to people that what the science actually is, what we actually know, that there isn't anything that's hidden about how vaccines work, and really trying to figure out what the questions are. A lot of the questions I've gotten from families are about why do we put things in vaccines? How do we choose what goes in there? Why are all of these extra things in there? And when I've explained to people the science of it and why it really works, then that demystifies it a little bit in that there's not somebody trying to give my child a chemical compound that's going to alter the rest of their life, but in fact it's there so the vaccine works better. People don't necessarily know that because that's not really information that's widely available. Absolutely. We are starting to see many of the diseases that we thought were going to go away because of vaccination come back. It's important to remember that there are parts of the world where polio is still widespread. And so we have to be aware that until these diseases are eliminated worldwide, it's always going to be a risk for us here just because of the kind of travel we have. We've certainly seen measles come back like we did this spring. We've certainly seen a lot of pertussis. We've actually started to see even scarier things like Haemophilus influenza B, which used to kill a lot of babies. And something that I went through medical school being told, thank goodness you'll never see because we have vaccination, and now I've taken care of more than I can think of. So it's a very scary thing out there, and I think we need to be very, very careful that we don't make big strides backwards.